Bhavin. We're so happy to have you here. Of course, Colin, myself, Paige, Peter, many of us have been talking about and singing your praises, but talking about how we've crossed paths with you so many different times and how you are just an amazing innovator, but more importantly to us, an amazing entrepreneur. So we'd love to hear from you. Just give us the highlights of what you're doing now and what your past is, and then we can just dive into a couple of questions and start to bring some of our amazing members up to the stage to ask you questions directly.
Fantastic. Happy to do that. So, by way of a quick background, and Michelle, thank you for for all the kind remarks. I've been a serial tech entrepreneur for pretty much all my life. I was fortunate enough to find my passion early on. I started coding when I was 10 years old in the sort of MS-DOS, CC++ kind of pre-internet days in 1989. I was schooled in Mumbai, and my school installed the very first computer room in 1989. I was in sixth grade. The computers were these sort of green colored monochrome terminals, 8086 microprocessor, and they had these 5 1/4 inch floppy drives and 360 KB of storage on each of those floppy drives. And for me, it was kind of love at first sight. And so I've never looked back. I've spent my entire life building technology products since then. Started my first company, co-founded along with my younger brother in 98. That's actually, I guess, in some sense, my highest return on investment because we borrowed $500 in capital, seed capital from my father, bought a bunch of servers in data centers and co-located them in the US and started selling hosting space and domain names and email and website builder and all these sort of web infrastructure services and cloud services for micro SMBs. It was called DirectI back then, or still is, I guess, in some sense. And then 16 years later, we actually sold that company for 160 million all cash exit to a public company based in Boston called Endurance. Since then, in the interim, I've also started three other companies that I still own. In 2012, I started Radix, and Radix basically owns some of the most premium top-level domains. We've got .online, .store, .tech, .space, .site, .website, many others. I'm currently roughly a $500 million enterprise. I have a CEO and a team, an extremely capable team that doesn't need me anymore. It's like a teenage child left home now, but that runs the show. And then in 2014, I started a company called Titan, with Titan and Flock, that basically provide two products, email and chat for micro SMBs. And we recently raised 30 million at a 300 million valuation from WordPress last year and signed sort of a strategic partnership with them. And then 2015, I started my fourth company, which also takes that sort of a considerable amount of time right now, goes into that one. It's called Zeta. And Zeta, I invested about 40 million of my personal capital, co-founded it with a gentleman called Ramki. And basically, we started with the goal of essentially rewriting all of banking tech. So if you think about all banks and fintechs and financial institutions across the globe, most of them are running software that was written more than 20 years, conceptualized at least more than 15, 20 years ago, before the cloud, before smartphones existed. And we've built at Zeta a full stack platform that can run an entire retail or commercial bank, every asset, liability, and payment product. It's going to be credit cards, deposits, debit cards, prepaid accounts, loans, mortgages, etc. And so if you're a bank or a fintech, so our clients are banks and fintechs across the globe in 6 different countries right now. You can basically use our platform to essentially run pretty much the entire bank and become much more agile, nimbler, faster in terms of innovation, as well as provide far more modern experiences to your customers and improve customer NPS, improve cost to income ratio. And Zeta recently raised now about $280 million, most of it from SoftBank. It's kind of my first ever institutional fundraise. In fact, the first time I've ever gone fundraising, period. But we raised 280 million, 250 from SoftBank and 30 from a few other funds and MasterCard at a 1.5 billion valuation. And so currently most of my time is spent between Zeta and Titan. So that communications and banking and payments.
Oh my gosh, there's like 10 questions I have for you. But let me just start with the first. So you have an idea for this company. Do you think about it as being scalable, defensible? What is it that goes into an idea that makes it a unicorn down the path? Like, how do you visualize that? Can you tell us that process that you go through? Like, how did you come up with Zeta?
Sure, that's an interesting question. I would say, firstly, that this is something I tell all entrepreneurs: focus on creating value, not valuation is kind of like a side effect. I don't think any entrepreneur, at least in my opinion, the ones that really achieve significant success, start out with the notion of, I want to build $1 billion company. You start out with a problem space. And if it's a big enough problem, you will basically, if you focus on it, you will essentially valuation will automatically happen as sort of a side effect. But you're right in many ways. In fact, over the last decade, I've kind of learned, in some cases even the hard way, but I've kind of learned, Colin, that the questions you asked are actually a very useful and important question, that you could end up spending your life, you're a smart individual, you could end up spending your life on solving a problem that just has a much more smaller scale and scope, or you could end up spending your life on working on a problem that has a much larger scale and scope. The truth is, by the way, in terms of brain power and amount of time and effort that it takes, I don't think there's any entrepreneur, small or big, that'll tell you that it's not a struggle. And so therefore you end up having to spend a similar amount of sort of time, resources, and effort anyways. And so I've always believed in this notion that if you're thinking, you might as well think big, because it takes same amount of brain power and brain cells. And so with Zeta, actually, I can anecdotally talk about that and give you perspective on how we picked this problem space and how it's such a massive problem space, etc., which has always been passionate about payments and banking. Typically, my any business now, Zeta actually comprises of multiple different businesses, but any business that I start, and all of them have been in B2B SaaS, I've discovered now this, or I've implemented the process, and I can take it through 4 stages, which is planning, discovery, scaling, and steady state. So every company that I've started, every idea that I've looked at has gone through sort of these 4 stages, which is planning, discovery, scaling, and steady state. So same thing happened with Zeta. In the planning stage, there is a hypothesis. Think about Zeta. I said, look, banking and payments is ripe for disruption. Banks are using legacy tech. Customers don't really like banking services. And so there's clear sort of opportunity. It's a massive space. It's global. It impacts everybody. Banks typically, these are things that you can discover in perhaps a few days of research, but like banks typically across the globe are spending about $200 billion per year in IT expenses. And so it's a huge market in terms of revenue opportunity. Even if you manage to end up getting only sort of 5-10% of the market share, you're still sitting on sizable pie. So these are all these sort of elements. Okay, here's a space that I definitely want to do something in, and that kind of kicks off the planning stage. At the planning stage, the goal is to actually construct a business plan that, for me, answers questions or validates questions or hypotheses in 6 buckets, which is, who is the persona? What is the problem or the primary problems that they're facing? What product am I going to build that is 10x better than existing status quo, that will actually meaningfully solve for that problem way better than anything else can solve for it? How am I going to get it to market? So my GTM. How am I going to make revenue? So what is my sort of revenue model now or in the future? And what is the moat that I can create such that if I start this and scale the business, that somebody else can't come and directly compete on just price or features, or that I actually create a sustainable business, right? So it's persona, problem, product, revenue, and moat. So those are kind of 6 variables that I'm trying to answer. And so in the planning stage, the goal is to just keep doing homework. We did that for about a year. So me and my co-founder, we started conceptualizing Zeta in 2014. We spent a year doing homework in terms of reading up about regulation, understanding P&Ls and profit and loss statements of existing banks, evaluating competitors, understanding where we should play. Like, for instance, one of the questions we had was, if you want to disrupt banking, should we start our own bank, or should we actually power the technology for banks? Right? So they're 2 completely different businesses. So all of this stuff at the planning stage, the goal is to obviously write down your known knowns, identify as many and figure out all the known unknowns. In that discovery process, figure out as many unknown unknowns, and then validate across all of these sort of 6 parameters to come to a conclusion in terms of, okay, there is a clear problem, there's a clear persona, it's a big enough problem, there's sizable market potential for it. We have the capability and the ingredients of success to be able to build a product that can cater to that particular audience. So in case of banking, for instance, as I said, our perspective was, we realized that all banks across global using legacy tech. We realized if we become a bank ourselves, we will be actually stuck with regulation and managing processes and bureaucracy and licensing in many different countries. So as a technology service provider, we're not kind of encumbered by any of that. Banking also sort of as a business has a capped return on equity, and get into too much detail there. But we eventually chose this path that, look, there's significant potential. And our goal is to sort of become the de facto technology platform that enables banks to become digital first companies and create modern experiences. Now, once I crossed the planning stage with okay, this is an area that we want to focus on. In the discovery phase, the goal is to get to product market fit. So build a version 1 of the product. And the deliverables essentially are that we had a hypothesis. If we create the product, we provide it to a bunch of customers. Does the pitch resonate? Do they buy it? Do they use it? Do they remain retained customers? Do they have a high NPS? They really love what we're doing and they love us, love our product. And do we have a traction channel that we can use to scale in a manner that LTV is greater than CAC. Now, in Zeta, that was pretty simple because cost of acquiring each customer is fairly low. Cost of acquiring each customer is fairly low. It's all BD and sales. Sorry,
No,
am I
no,
audible?
Bhavin, no, we got
Yeah.
you. We hear you. And I was just going to say, so basically, you're the same as every startup. You find a problem, you solve that problem. The only difference is you find a big problem and you solve that problem. That's very interesting.
No, absolutely. And I'll quickly summarize out here. So at the end of discovery, the goal is to get product market fit, high NPS, high retention, and a traction channel that works. And during the discovery stage, you're also putting together a playbook to scale the business, bringing in the right kind of middle management and so on and so forth. Then we move to the next stage, which is scaling, put in capital, build out the sales and marketing teams, build out the sales and marketing playbooks, build out the delivery playbooks, and basically scale the business, and then eventually it gets a steady state. And so I actually spend a lot of my time on the first, let's say, 2.5 stages of the cycle. I'm very deeply involved during planning, during discovery, and halfway through scaling, and then tons of smart people in the organization that actually take over and then scale the business. And this applies to the sort of company as a whole. It applies to a specific market or a specific product that we're launching within the company. Invariably, it still goes to kind of the same four phases, if you will.
I think we can all sympathize with the fact that the bank's offer is so slow. Every time I go to do a wire, do anything with the bank, it's like they're tapping away for 20, 30 minutes on that computer and they're saying, oh, it's just working very slow. You solved the problem, you identified it, you solved it, you take it to market, you understand distribution, you're killing it. I can see right now why that creating a unicorn and what you do is it's almost like a process. It's not like some magical smart talking human WeWork style CEO we're talking about here. It's somebody who understands a process, who knows how to identify an idea, who knows how to vet that idea, and then take it to market. Just listening to you is absolutely fascinating. Michelle, I know you're nodding here, so I'm going to shut up.
Yeah, I mean,
Colin, that's also because I've built a lot of lemons, I will tell you. I have made some of my worst mistakes have been stupid products, things that were unvalidated. Yeah, trust me, I've gone through a journey where I've created crap that nobody wanted enough number of times.
that's great. So, just a couple of takeaways. One thing I hear is you take a very analytical approach. It sounds like you're brutally honest about what the research is showing, because I think a lot of people fall in love with their idea and it's hard for them to, so to speak, separate from it. And then I also heard you talking about NPS, so the net promoter score. So you're really making sure that this is something not that people kind of like and you might have to talk them into it. What I am inferring is it's something that they will really love and see the value of. And last but very importantly, you really adhere to this idea that you can build an attraction model, which we might also say is distribution. So you really are making it sound simple, I'm going to say, and obviously you've done it extremely effectively. But wow, you take a very disciplined approach. And that's something that we really love to hear insight into here at Serial Entrepreneur Club, because that's something that we can quantify and give people help on how they might approach businesses. So, on that note, I have a question. Where do you see, like, you're like a prophet to us. So, where do you see still existing opportunities in the markets, in specific verticals? Like, you're looking around, I know you're very technical, and I'm sure you're very engrossed in what trends are. We would be curious to know what trends that, of spark your interest, if you could tell us.
Sure, you're happy to do that. I think the two or three that I'm closely following is, of course, AI, biotech. There's a lot of stuff taking place in biotech that I think is going to drastically change. People are getting more health conscious as a trend in general, but more importantly, in the last 10, 15 years, there's so much happened in the sort of platform in biotech. We mapped out it took us like what 10, 15 years to map out the human genome and over $1 billion, and now anybody can do it with less than $1,000 on a machine in like less than 30 minutes. So there's so much progress that has been made in terms of understanding cellular molecular biology and being able to apply that to personalized medicine. That's kind of a huge area of development that I think is going to skyrocket in many ways. What else? I must say I haven't really gotten on the blockchain and crypto bandwagon as much. I have some perspectives on it. I do definitely see the benefit and advantages, but I've always thought of blockchain more as a technology, an enabler of some really interesting use cases. And so I haven't really spent a lot of time on the kind of whole crypto blockchain side, but definitely there's tons of potential there. So
Have
yeah,
you bought
AI
an
and
NFT
biotech.
yet? Bhavin, have
I
you bought your first?
haven't.
I have
I
not
haven't
either. So,
gotten. No, yeah, I must say I haven't actually dabbled in it yet. But yeah, AI and biotech will be kind of areas that I think are ripe for disruption. I think everywhere where you see, depends whether you want to be. I've been B2B focused all my life, so it's easier for me to spot opportunities in B2B as opposed to B2C. And I see much like banking, there's insurance, there's mutual funds and investing, there is healthcare and health services, all that use a lot of legacy tech that don't have the ability to use data underlying to generate meaningful insights at scale. And so there's lots and lots of opportunity in many of these areas where there's tons of legacy tech employed, but it's a massive opportunity because it impacts every single individual on the planet. So I think those would be other areas from B2B standpoint that I would think of.
Yeah, it's really an amazing time to be in business for sure. So, on that note, we have some folks that have been extremely patient here on the stage that we would like to get their questions. So, when you come up with your question, please try to get right to the point so that we can get through and be respectful of Bhavin's time. So, first, I'll start right after Bhavin. Folks above, if you have a question, just flash your mic. But let's start with audio. Audio, what is your question for Bhavin?
Hey, Bhavin, health, wealth, love, happiness now to you, and congratulations. And may you go from strength to strength in all your business endeavors. I'm myself an entrepreneur and trying to grow businesses. And I've been doing a lot of meditation and mindfulness, education, wisdom, intelligence, and study and research. So I'm just wondering how you utilize the wisdom of meditation to help you concentrate your endeavors to grow your business.
Audio, fantastic question. And I can very candidly say I wish I utilized much more of those tools than I do today. I actually, longest period of time, I was not really as much into spirituality, meditation, and in general, hadn't really explored that aspect in any form. But about 2.5 years ago, I started doing a bunch of reading, partially motivated by Tim Ferriss's book on Tools to Titans, where pretty much I think 80% of the people in that book talk about meditation being an extremely important tool for their success. I ended up reading a couple of really good books that I strongly recommend. I love them. One is a book called Waking Up by Sam Harris, and the other one is it's a book by Robert Wright. Something it's a scientific take on Buddhism. I forget the title of the book. And so I started really spending some more time on those topics and areas as compared to what I did before. I have had bouts where I will take time out to meditate every day or every alternate day for a couple of months and then again pause and then restart. And so I certainly am not as regular as I hoped I would be. But every time when I have engaged or indulged in it, I see a difference in terms of, I think more and more. So I'll give you my perspective on it. I probably have a lot to learn from you compared to what I can share in that regards. But fundamentally, I think the most valuable resource we all have is time. And a vast majority of us don't even realize it in this sort of multitasking environment with multiple devices and constant interruptions as to how much of that time gets utilized in distracted thinking that doesn't add anything concrete throughout the day. And that applies equally to me as to anybody else. And meditation is a time tested, centuries old tool, and the only one that can effectively enable you to improve focus, reduce distractions, reduce stress and anxiety, and all of that. So I certainly would strongly recommend it as a tool, and I hope to get better at it in terms of inculcating it more regularly in my practice. Is what I would say.
Excellent. So the next person, and I love what you had to say, audio. That was a great question to really think about how are we more productive and focused as individuals. So thank you for asking that. Next, we have Gurav. I hope I said your name correctly.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle, for pronouncing it better than other folks in the Western Hemisphere. So I have a question for Bhavin. So Bhavin, huge fan, an opportunity to have a conversation with you is like dream come true to me. And you have started working with your brother back then in the 90s, and working with siblings. I am still working with my brother on an idea. He's on the tech part and I'm on the product side, and I have a long experience in product. So I can utilize my playbook of product elsewhere for the organizations to catalyze the process. But when you're working with a sibling, how do you get them to the single idea and work on it? Plus, it is more like that. What challenges you faced while working with your brother Divyang?
Sure. I've been fortunate enough to have some really amazing co-founders. I've had two in my life. My first company was, yes, with my younger brother Div. And my current company, Zeta, I have co-founded with a guy called Ramki, who's basically has worked with me in the past for about 10 years, and we started this company together. Both of them are gems, amazing people, two of the most brilliant people I know. Potentially, I would actually go so far as to say that they're both smarter than even I am. So with Div, it was an amazing time. It's obviously great to be able to work with your brother because there's automatically implicit trust. I think that's one of the things that's most important when you're looking at a co-founder. And vast majority of founder relationships, actually probably, I guess it technically applies to all relationships, but specifically since we're talking about companies, founder relationships, vast majority of them, if there's any sort of issues in the future, it's because of lack of trust. And so benefit there is that there's already implicit trust with the relationship. And to your first point, actually, me and he ended up working on different things. And I think the good advantage of having somebody who's super smart, extremely intelligent, equally driven, an outstanding entrepreneur in his own accord. The benefit of that is that obviously you don't want to spend both of your time on the exact same problem at the exact same time all of the time because then you're just wasting resources. But you can act as each other's sounding boards on areas, whether it's departments, functions, or products that you're working on. And so that was the automatic relationship that ended up forming between me and Dave, and in some sense, right now, between me and Ramki, is that both me and Dave would end up picking up different problems. We had implicit trust that whatever problem I own or he owns, that we will actually be able to deliver the best outcome. And we would constantly update each other in conversations and take advice and treat each other as a sounding board for validating that the approach that we're taking makes sense and if there's any things that we haven't considered from a risk mitigation standpoint or scaling standpoint or things like that. So I think that was the approach that we used.
Thank you, Bhavin, for these words, and this is going to be really helpful for me to strategize properly and more to be more communicative with my co-founder slash my younger brother. So thank you for that, and a huge opportunity for me to have a conversation with you. I cannot express my feeling right now.
Uh-huh.
So yeah.
We feel the same way, Gaurav, seriously. So thank you, Bhavin. That's amazing. Like, it's just your clarity, your insight is very much appreciated. It feels very straight from the heart. So, on that note, we have Johnny. What is your question for Bhavin?
Hi, Michelle. Great room and great to hear from you, Bhavin. So, I deal with the world of fintech. I wanted to ask you a question. Do you see embedded finance dominating the industry of the world of fintech come 2030? We're obviously seeing Facebook Pay, Apple Pay opening that up where financial products will no longer be a standalone entity come 2030 and it'll be more part of the user interface. And then lastly, what has surprised you on your entrepreneurial journey? Thanks, Bobby.
Sure. A huge believer of embedded finance and embedded banking. I don't necessarily know what what you're referring to in terms of whether it dominate the industry, but I'll give you my perspective on embedded finance, embedded banking, etc. Is that financial services, and this by the way happened in the communication space in some sense the last 2 3 decades, right? There was a point in time where point-to-point communication was specifically transactional in nature, the early days of email, the early days of instant messaging, the early days of conversations and phone calls, and essentially each communication was a transaction between I don't know, two parties or a group of people initiated in some sense, and then there's an end of conversation basically. And tools and technologies that were providing this were providing it in a transactional manner where essentially somebody initiated this transaction and closed the transaction. So that was the case with communication more than a decade ago. But now if you think of communication is invisible in and embedded into sort of products, apps, and experiences that manifest purpose. So take Clubhouse, for instance. One could arguably say it's fundamentally a conference call, but it actually isn't, right? It's embedded communication into a community experience. So the purpose of Clubhouse is not just communication. In fact, communication is actually invisible to people participating. It's really this creation of a community, creation of aligning people around a purpose and having these amazing conversations. And by the way, communication ends up powering it. And so I wanted to draw this analogy because we see the same thing now starting in finance and banking. Banking and payments was all about transactions. It was all about getting money from point A to point B. But really, nobody wakes up in the morning thinking, I'm so excited, I have to make 5 payments today, right? You're always performing a transaction for a specific purpose. You're always dealing with money and finances for a specific purpose. It's saving, spending, growing, investing, earning to achieve some sort of a purpose. And so that's really Zeta. In fact, at Zeta, we basically started the company with this aim and goal saying that we want to make payments invisible, we want to democratize banking, and we want to make financial services available in a transparent and intuitive manner when and where they are needed. That's the fundamental goal of embedded finance and embedded banking. Now, fintechs play, a huge role in this. Banks play a huge role in this. Merchants play a huge role in this. Retailers, etc., and many other parties and constituents play a huge role in this, including infrastructure players, whether it's Google and Apple, that enable some capabilities and functionalities, with the goal that transactions are no longer relevant. They kind of happen. You should be taking them for granted. It's like you open you turn on your shower and water comes out. You don't really give a thought as to why that's happening and how that's happening, and it's just completely invisible and transparent to you. And water by itself serves 20 different purposes, but it's kind of embedded into each of those purposes in a transparent way. And so that's what embeddable finance is. I'm shopping for something, the ability to be able to get access to money if I don't have it then and there available. The ability to be able to use financial data and information to get access, so whatever it might be. So being able to embed a specific use case and serve a specific purpose by leveraging financial services, that's really what embeddable finance is about. And there was a point in time when technology did not exist to be able to support that very easily. But looking at the last few years in terms of how fintechs have sort of unbundled finance, and you'll see whenever this takes place, you'll also see a large amount of unbundling, right? Until some time ago, a checking account was a checking account, a deposit was a deposit, a loan was a loan, and they had some similar fundamental characteristics. But now, if you think about it, same loan can serve as a buy now, pay later loan, or a POS loan, or an installment loan, there's so many different forms of it because they're serving a specific purpose. Underlying it is still a credit product where somebody's ability to pay is being assessed and a certain amount is being sanctioned and they're being asked to pay it in a certain format. But because of technology and the way we can scale things now, the flexibility of configuring that and embedding that experience at the point of purchase, the point of sale, becomes much more easy and possible. Yeah, I'm a huge believer in embeddable finance and embeddable banking. And in fact, one of the things that we want to do is, look, banks fundamentally will remain as in the role that they are in today, right? Every single country is going to have a licensed, regulated financial service regime. There will have to be players who essentially act as custodians of people's money and act as responsible organizations that basically provide these financial, that are allowed to manufacture these financial services. But the stacks and platforms they operate on don't make embeddable finance conducive or standardizable or easily accessible or available to players that want to unbundle these services and offer them or embed them in a certain way. And so one of the important elements of features and functionality of our product is to allow banks and fintechs to be able to embed financial experiences in various journeys, basically. You asked another question, which is what has surprised me as an entrepreneur. Can't really think of a good example, but I'll paraphrase one of my favorite quotes is that I've always found it that both myself and entrepreneurs generally, or any individual, always find it surprising. We can tend to overestimate what we might be able to do in a year's time, in 6 months' time. I can build this product, develop it, put it out there, etc. But we always tend to underestimate what a focused approach can deliver in 10 years' time and the kind of growth you can achieve in a decade. And it's because compounding doesn't come naturally to us as human beings. As human beings, we can very easily sort of compute linear equations and linear algorithms. But when it comes to notion of compounding, you see all these sort of riddles. If I was to give you the opportunity, if I was to give you $1 today that doubled every week versus give you $200 at the end of the year, which one would you take? It's very hard to intuitively figure out which one makes more sense because the notion of compounding is difficult for people to understand. When you work consistently in a particular space, industry, product, area, avenue, problems, space, consistently for years on end, you'd be surprised at how much exponential growth is back-ended in that equation because of compounding, which doesn't intuitively, like none of these, if you read the biographies of whether it's an Apple or a Microsoft or a Facebook, etc., none of the entrepreneurs there when they started out ever realized how big what they built could become. They were out there to solve a problem. They kept at it for decades and consistently saw compounded growth to grow to the size and scale that they are. So I guess that probably be a candidate.
Wow. There's so many lessons there. I feel like you need to write a book, Bob, and you're imparting so much wisdom on us, and we really appreciate it. So, on that note, we have Dickie, who's been very patient. Dickie, what is your question for Bhavin?
It's not really a question. I wanted to say hi. Bhavin, great to see you. You may remember me with Paul Lomax when we were one of your very early customers at DirectEye with free parking. And we moved the whole of our platform onto your platform. And I just wanted to say thank you so much because it saved our life at the time. And free parking subsequently been sold to Namesco. And I'm not in the domain name business anymore, even though I still absolutely love the domain name business. I've now got a very exciting renewable energy storage business. I've seen you on Clubhouse a few times, and I was talking to Colin earlier and just wanted to jump on and just say hi, and great to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Dickie. It's lovely to see you, hear you, hear from you also. And yeah, it's the domain name industry is, I keep saying, it's such an amazing industry. It's so small in terms of all of the people within it have been around for such a long time. And it's kind of industry that I guess you can try checking out, but you can never leave. Even after I sold my company, we still back in with Radix and then with Titan. And so in some sense or the other, it's always going to drag me back. So it's always great to catch up with all of you folks and
Yeah,
reminisce about.
and I was very lucky. I came over to Mumbai and came to your offices, and your team were amazing. They hosted us brilliantly at the time. Yeah, it was really good days, and it's just been lovely to watch your journey from afar. Because, as I say, I think we were fairly early adopters of your system, and I've sent quite a few mates onto the reseller club system as well, which has always worked really well for them. And here you are, and the sound of Zeta. Oh my goodness! It sounds like you're going to have another great one on your hands as well. And I'm hoping to be following in your footsteps, Bavin, with Core Energy. Really exciting. Having storage brings security of supply to the energy business, which, of course, with the Ukraine and Russia crisis, Europe especially really needs it. I didn't say it earlier, but we've also got plans to go into America any minute now. So very exciting times.
Yeah, I remember, Bhavin, when I was a farmer back when I graduated from college, how hard it was to pick a flat of raspberries and make $20. And then we started selling these things called domain names. And literally, here's the idea. I'm going to give you a name and you give me money back. It didn't feel like work. You launched, and we launched .club, as we sold it to GoDaddy. But I've often been said, if there's one company that is done better than anyone else in this industry, it's Radix. You put together a great portfolio of domain names. Again, another idea. You seem to stick yourself out there on these ideas, these concepts that they're not necessarily mainstream yet, but they become mainstream over time.
Colin, no, absolutely. And by the way, I think few people in the industry know and are aware that we obviously launched our TLDs, or you guys had one of the best TLDs also, but we launched our TLDs in 2013, 2014. But there's a good period of about 2.5 years, starting late 2009 all the way till 2012. I had a small team, there's an ex-McKinsey consultant, Deep, who's the current CEO, myself, and three other analysts that spent that entire 2.5 years building so many profit and loss statements and projections out 10 years, etc., for thousands and thousands of TLDs to come to that we wanted to eventually select and the right price that we wanted to bid for them. And so a lot of groundwork and analysis was done behind the scenes for 2.5 years. In fact, in some sense, we had the luxury to do that for 2.5 years because we started that exercise in 2009 because originally the new GTLD round was going to get opened up in late 2010, then it became 2011, then it became 2012. So we ended up getting the luxury of about 2.5 years of planning versus what we originally would have had to get to that outcome. And then I think the second one is the whole selection of TLDs. And the second piece, and I really, if there's one thing that I really pride myself on, and I really am truly humbled by, is the quality of talent that we have and the kind of people that we have. And I spend a lot of my personal time on recruitment, on hiring the best players, on hiring the best talent, to a point where it ends up making me redundant in many circumstances. And Radix is kind of a living example of that. A lot of the success post that TLD selection on today, I think we're one of the best run registries, if not the best run. We do a tremendous amount of analytics, drives kind of decisions in the organization. And we've got an amazing team. I think everybody in the industry keeps telling me that and then makes me proud of the team that we've got.
Well, we're just glad you never went for dot club. You would have been tough in an auction. We had to fight donuts for that one. All right, people are everything. You can see what happened with dot club with Jeff and Michelle took over as CEO of dot club a year or two before we sold it to GoDaddy. It became one of the most successful, along with your TLDs as well. What a great! It's all about the people. I think you touched upon so many different points today, but I think that's probably the number one. It's all about the people you can put in place who can help get you to that unicorn status. Is there a difference in the type of person going from 100 million to a billion or from a million to 100 million? Is there a difference in the type of person that you would hire or profile of individual?
I'm certain there is a difference in the profile of the individual that we would hire in those circumstances. I would say that a couple of lessons, as I said, we spend a lot of time in hiring the best talent. So there's a lot of lessons we've learned along the way out there also. But one of the things that I've realized, and that's why I spoke about this whole planning, discovery, scaling, and steady state, is that it takes a very different kind of skill set, passion, inclination, ability for the individual who's doing the 0 to 1 motion. If you use Peter Thiel's terminology from his kind of book 0 to 1, so the individual who's doing the 0 to 1 motion, which is the planning and discovery stages, versus the individual who leads the organization to grow it from 1 to 10, which is the scaling and then the steady state phases. And so you end up, as I said, I spend a lot of my time on the first 2.5 phases. It's harder to find talent that can tackle 0 to 1. There's much more talent available that can take a company from 1 to 10. So that 0 to 1 phase, it requires a different kind of skill set because you need to be able to deal with uncertainty, with vagueness, with pretty much at that point in time, everything is unknown. Well, known unknowns and unknowns. So you need to be able to deal with this rapid discovery of known unknowns and unknown unknowns. Where will you find the information? The ability to rapidly self-learn a huge foundation of knowledge in an area that you've never probably touched before. And we started, whether it's hosting, whether it's new GTLDs, whether it's email and communication, whether it's payments and banking, they're all very different domains. When we started looking at payments and banking in 2014, Ramki and I had zero clue about either of those domains. But you need somebody who's got this first principles engineering mentality that starts from the foundational concepts and derives everything along the way in a very rapid manner. When you look at the scaling pieces, you're typically bringing in folks with domain and functional expertise who've done this before, who've taken ready-made playbooks and run them at scale before. Operational excellence starts becoming much more important than this sort of whole discovery phase, so to speak. So operational sort of excellence, efficiency, those kinds of things become important. So it requires a different skill set per se. So that's one element in terms of hiring. So when you said you had 1 to, I would say even 10 million, and then the 10 million to a billion, they're two very different journeys and require two very different types of individuals.
Wow, it's amazing. It seems as though you're such a student of business as well. And that's like so amazing to hear someone that has such a passion for the people and the whole process and really finding solutions. I absolutely love the idea of Zeta, and you just explained it in such a way that really made sense to me. And I'm so looking forward to seeing it massively available. But on that note, before we go to Edna, I have a question. You've been so successful and you make it look so easy. Is there anything that you would do differently knowing what you know now?
Sure. I think every entrepreneur will tell you it's far from easy. I would be completely incorrect if I said it was easy in any form whatsoever. In fact, I think since I'm talking about this point, I do want to touch upon it a bit more. It's unfortunate that the entire industry mostly recognizes only the glamour in the space and the crazy high valuations and the huge fundraisers and so on and so forth. And there aren't adequate forums that actually showcase number of failures, mistakes, issues, hurdles, struggles that entrepreneurs and founders have had to go through in various phases of their company at various times. So I'll certainly say that there needs to be more material out there. And we've made our fair share of, as I said, stupid mistakes, built products and spent millions of dollars on building them, and only to find out nobody ever needed them and it was a crappy idea to begin with. Opened up in markets where we felt we had a play but didn't really spend time validating adequately, only to find out a year later that we don't really have a play there. Tons and tons of mistakes in every possible area and avenue that you can think of. Taken on much more than we can chew, and therefore been overwhelmed and stressed for months and months and years. And the opposite, taken on much lesser than we can chew, and then be underwhelmed with the results and size that we could have actually taken on more. So yeah, we've been through, and by we, this will apply to anybody who's an entrepreneur of any size and scale, that there's always that struggle. I think entrepreneurs, I have this interesting presentation, a video, if it is online, I think somewhere, which I deliver, called Reframing Failure. And I think entrepreneurs have this sort of mindset where they think of failure very differently from other conventional people might think of it as, but it's a topic for probably another time. But so yeah, as I said, I don't think that it's ever been easy. And to give specific examples, in the second part of your question, I think two areas that I can talk about, they're both related. Two separate areas let me talk about actually. One is that some of the biggest mistakes I've made is trying to cut short the planning and discovery stage because I intuitively felt something was right. And sometimes entrepreneurial success is your Achilles tendon. You succeed at building five products, you suddenly think that you have the ability to sort of skip a bunch of steps, think through the sixth one, build it, put it out there, and people will come. And it's a humbling experience to realize that at the end of the day, your intuition can lead you astray. And so as I said, I've made some investments and made a ton of mistakes in building the wrong things that actually nobody ever needed because I decided that, oh, this I think is a great idea, and didn't bother to go through the template that I spoke about earlier, which is a series of steps in planning, truly understand the persona, truly understand the problem, truly understand if you have a product that is actually 10x better than the existing solutions for solving that problem, and instead skipped all those steps purely based on gut and intuition. So I think that's one area where I made a ton of my mistakes. I think one other thing I would say is that, and this we learned in direct time much later, but now subsequently with all the other businesses, we've kind of started doing it much sooner, is that in a B2B SaaS business, we found invariably North America is one of the largest markets. And so one of the things I would have done sooner in perhaps Directa is enter that market sooner and started aggressively pursuing market share in that market sooner. Because pursuing sort of market share in every other country, it's kind of divided into small segments. It's a significant amount of effort. For every dollar spent in North America, you end up getting a relatively higher ROI, in some cases almost 3 to 5x more in a B2B SaaS business compared to, let's say, India or elsewhere. And so that's fed into our expansion strategies now, where we try and open up that channel sooner. So
Again,
those would be
happy
two
you
top
didn't do that.
mistakes.
Happy you didn't do that because Two Cows and Easy Hosting gave us an opportunity to get some market share as well.
Well, you guys are running a great company at Tukas. I have huge respect for what you guys built there, for what Elliot and team Ross back there, I think Ross Raider built. I don't know if you know this, but I was an early customer of Tukas. I started as a Tukas reseller
Seriously, you
whilst we were
basically
getting our.
stole all your good ideas from us and you turned them in and made
That's what
a
Elliot
billion
likes to say.
dollars. There you go.
He made it better.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, I want to be respectful of your time, Bhavin. We have about 15 minutes more of the show, and we have five more people. So please ask your question very directly so Bhavin can help you out. So next on the stage, we have Edna.
Yeah, hey Bhavin. So a couple of years back, you spoke at the Matrix conference with Kunal, right? And I saw the video on your YouTube
Did,
channel, and I did hear you stressing out on the point of doing time versus thinking time. And in the later last year February, last year September, you did say that same again, that you should have something like 70%, 70 to 30 ratio for doing versus thinking time. So my question would be, what is the kind of atmosphere you get into in your thinking time? I know you just can't sit in your balcony and think. So what is the right kind of atmosphere you get into if you want to think?
I think substituted Edna for Arihant, but I'll finish off with that question. We can, Edna, move on to you right after that. Thank you, Arihant, for that question. So I don't know. I somehow think best at my computer, by the way. I will say this, like I open up a text pad or a Google Doc or a wiki page and start putting down notes. I generally am a huge fan of nested bulleted notes and do my research and keep adding notes in my documents. So most of my thinking time is actually spent at I use my computer as a notepad in that situation, but it's spent on my computer. And then going back to the principle you spoke about, yes, I strongly believe in that. That's another area where I think I have had scenarios where I've made my personal mistakes, which is spending a lot of time doing. And so it's very easy to keep yourselves busy by just constantly doing things. And I have been prescribing this principle now for almost 5 7 years, even within my team, that actually doing time is lesser of the entire equation. I can talk about this whole division between discovery, implementation, and measurement. And so I talk about how you should ideally spend between 30 to 50% of your time in discovering what to do, which itself is an activity, and maybe 30% of your time in actually doing it, and then 20 to 30% of your time in measuring whether what you did actually accomplished the outcome that you expected it would accomplish when you set out to do this thing. So if you spend a good 70% of your time in discovery and measurement and 30% of your time in implementation, that's kind of rough breakup and formula that I use, that spend more of your time in both thinking and then in a retrospective in understanding if and where you went wrong. And actually the implementation should not consume more than 30% of your time.
Got it. Thank you so much. Bhavin, also be super active on Twitter and YouTube, please. I'm personally looking forward to your tweets and videos. And apologies, I thought it was my turn, so I took the mic. Sorry for that.
No worries.
No problem at all. So, Edna, you're next. Bhavin,
Hey,
yeah, it looks like the question was about renewable energy. I'm not sure if you heard that all. Where do you
no, I
see?
didn't. I got disconnected. I apologize. If you can paraphrase that for me again. Sure, I will start out by saying that I don't have any personal expertise in this particular area almost at all. So anything that I say will be more fundamental slash first principles thinking, but not really coming from specific knowledge or numbers or understanding of the industry. But the one thing I've invariably seen is that some of the best solutions, diversity is kind of mother of invention. And when you are faced, we've seen humanity whenever we've been faced with problems of a high scale and magnitude, that we can come up with solutions around them. So I would say, I think this might seem a bit naive, uninformed perhaps, but my thought process is around, if we make it more imperative, like right now, for instance, I think one of the big things in the energy sector is that if you think about oil is actually hugely subsidized in every single market, right? Gas prices and access to gas and petrol and diesel and oil, etc., is hugely subsidized. By virtue of that, therefore, you're already creating a scenario where there is no significant incentive. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, evolutionary algorithms have driven all of us humans to be far more short-sighted than long-sighted. And so we're not creating that adversity, we're not creating that huge incentive to actually require people to act. And so I think if you ask me, I think the biggest contributor would be, if now you're talking about the energy crisis now, partly thanks to the situation going on, the war going on in Ukraine and other sort of reasons, that's resulting in requiring countries to look at other solutions. where we shouldn't have to technically wait for it. Can we artificially create that adversity or create that incentive where people need to act and people will find a solution? I always remain hugely optimistic about what all of us can do if we set our mind to it. It's just that sometimes we lack the inclination and incentive to act in the right direction. And then it's incumbent upon the government, perhaps in most of these cases, because they are the custodians of the future in many ways. But it's incumbent upon them to try and come up with ways and means to create that forcing function, as we call it in mathematics in some sense, right? So create that forcing function where you have no choice but to act. And in some sense, we elect these leaders, but unfortunately, right now, as I said, the incentives are all misaligned, and so pace tends to be slower. So yeah, that would be my kind of perspective. As I said, might seem a bit naive and uninformed, but that's what I can say.
No, it's a great perspective, and I thank you for that. And basically, what I'm working on is trying to bridge the gap between oil and gas and renewable energy so that they can all coexist together. So, thank you very much for your insight. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Michelle.
You bet. All right. So, Rohit, what is your question for Bhavin?
Thank you so much, Michelle, for giving the mic. Happy to be here. Hi, Bhavin. We have been connected on LinkedIn for many years, and I believe we might have met in one of Retail Association of India conferences or something. I have two very different, unrelated questions for you. One is regarding your company Zeta, and I know that you mentioned that you are not much into blockchain and crypto technologies as such. I just wanted to ask with you whether you have explored the impact of decentralized finance on your initiative for Zeta. And the second unrelated question is that I've been practicing meditation for over 15 years now, and I truly believe that everyone must meditate for at least 10 minutes a day. And if you cannot get those 10 minutes, you must do for 20 to get those 10 minutes. So, how many minutes do you meditate a day? Thank you so much for giving this opportunity.
Thanks, Rohit. Second question, as I said before, I wish I did that. And I think it's stupid of me to say that I don't have 10 minutes a day. I need to. There are phases when I end up meditating for periods of time, and then there are phases where I just don't. I'm way worse at creating time for that than I should be. And I like the way you put it that if you don't have 10 minutes, then you need to take out 20. It actually is, it makes logical sense counterintuitively. With regards to, sorry, I didn't catch what your first question was. If you can repeat that.
It's regarding the decentralized finance. I
Yes,
am not sure.
decentralized finance. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So as I mentioned before, I actually haven't. I spent a lot of time studying the. I love the blockchain algorithm. For the first time, somebody with Bitcoin and blockchain created an algorithm that solves for the double spend problem in a decentralized manner. It was a very, very elegant solution. So the sort of the geek and the kind of math aficionado in me really enjoyed reading up all about it and learning about the algorithms and the fundamentals. But I must say that I haven't really spent a lot of time in exploring DeFi. Beta, by the way, is agnostic, right? So we basically are a banking and payments platform, and for us, currency is an attribute. So our platform can handle DeFi just as it handles any kind of centralized currencies. We don't distinguish between those. You can essentially use the platform for issuing financial products and services on whether it's a decentralized sort of finance product or service or whether it's issued through a licensed regulated body. The reason why, as I said, I haven't personally dived in it is I'm yet to look. DeFi brings with it tons of advantages, but also tons of disadvantages. There's huge volatility. There isn't somebody standing behind the currency. There is potential risk of countries changing their stance on it and so on and so forth, or making it illegal or things of that, or creating significant amount of regulation around it and things of that. And so I haven't yet gotten to a point where I am where I have spent enough time to really explore opportunities and avenues there because I haven't been fully convinced. Is all I'll say. So from a technology standpoint, Zeta does certainly supports DeFi, but we're not actively an active player in the DeFi economy yet.
Thank you for that. And I guess you might have conflated a little bit between DeFi and cryptocurrency over there. And my question was more aligned to on the direction that Zeta is, of course, being more about centralized finance, and DeFi, by definition, being a decentralized finance platform and network which is self-sustaining and cannot be taken down, like you just got disconnected from Clubhouse. That kind of thing will never happen on a decentralized finance. Yeah, I'm sure, but I appreciate your answer. Thank you so much for that. And my question was more related to that. How have you explored Zeta, taking Zeta into DeFi?
No,
but
we
I
haven't
guess you know.
done that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bhavin. Really appreciate it.
All right. Excellent. So we are at the end of the hour. Bhavin, we're huge fans. Really, I feel like I just got a PhD course and launching and building a tech company and more. So, Colin, over to you. Let's close out this session and let this gentleman go to bed.
Yeah, isn't that amazing what happened today? And we saw, Bhavin, you come on here and you just opened up and you shared your knowledge, your understanding, and just a way that we all appreciate. We learned so much. The mandate of this show is to crack the code, to figure it out. And today I feel like we made a lot of progress in that area. I know I'm going to go back and listen to this episode. You can listen to this episode on www.startup.club and sign up to our email list so that you can get information about speakers like Bhavin who come onto our club here on Startup Club. And also, we just launched a podcast with this show. This is the 51st show, so you can pick up this show on any of your favorite podcast networks. If you go to Apple or Spotify, search for Serial Entrepreneur Club. And next week, we have, from one great to the next, we have Sheil Manat next Friday, 2 o'clock Eastern. I know he's got about 4 million followers, a few more than you, Ed, on Clubhouse, and he's been involved in 500 startups. So we're going to be talking about how startups can raise money and what does it take to raise money. Bhavin, thank you very much. I know I'm following you. Everyone here in the audience, if you liked what you heard, feel free to follow one of the speakers. Have a great day.
Colin, thank you
We
so
will.
much, Colin and Michelle, for inviting me here. And I once again truly apologize for messing up the daylight savings time. It's always confusing, but really enjoyed my conversation. Thank you so much for all the insightful questions, and thank you for having me here.
Thank you for your generosity. Be well.